Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, and welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network. It's hosted by me, Lisa Fine, and Mary Shirley. Today's guest is somebody who I think about as a GGIC, a great guy in compliance. Today, we have Adam Balfour, who's the Vice President and General Counsel for Corporate Compliance and Vice President for Global Risk Management at Bridgestone. So kind of a handful, mouthful, out there. And he's based in Nashville. He's originally from Scotland, which you're going to hear from his voice. He came to the U.S. and then he stayed and he became a part of the compliance community, which we'll talk about. You know, probably the most important thing to mention about Adam is he's one of the recent awardees of a GGIC for his Sunday morning compliance tips, which is now a weekly column with Corporate Compliance Insights, who's also our producer. Other thing that's great about Adam, you'll hear more about it, he's also a dad of four. And a very avid runner and just an all-around compliance leader and wonderful person. So thank you so much for joining us. And let's talk a little bit about your journey to where you are now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. I'm curious, about the GGIC that I won for the Sunday morning tips. I'm like, is there anybody else posting on Sunday mornings? Like, was there other people, or was that I won by default of it being Sunday mornings? But
well, we have. I'll just say it wasn't. We didn't beat anybody else in the Sunday morning compliance tips, but it was for one of the great innovations that came on this year, and there were some others that got that. So it's a very highly selective process, as you'll see, which comes up with, we come up with different topics whenever we hit a landmark episode. So if it's 50 or 100, that's our annual GGICs, but they are highly sought after.
They are. I'm of course teasing Lisa. I think, I know each other and we like to kind of have fun, but no, I think it's, I do genuinely appreciate it. I think what you're doing, you and Mary do, is just absolutely wonderful. You build a community, you bring people together, it really just makes a difference. So thank you.
Well, we're thrilled that you are a part of this community and really a great supporter of women in compliance and of diversity. And so these are all things we'll talk a little bit about. But before we do that, for those of you who can't hear your Scottish accent, then you're probably in Scotland. But if you could just talk to us a little bit about how you got to compliance and, your path to being a U.S. compliance officer as well.
Sure. Happy to share a little bit about that. And I think a lot of my journey, it's been like a lot of luck, I'd say, is definitely helped. And certainly, talking to community, like, just generosity from other people along the way. I didn't get here by myself. And I think that's something that as time goes on, I appreciate that more and more. So I was born and raised in Scotland. Some people hear the accent more so than others, but it's still there. I'll say a random word every now and then that'll throw people off. But I went to law school there. I went to the University of Dundee. Some frankly just wonderful professors there just really got me inspired. Interested in the legal profession. And also the chance, that was back when the UK was still part of the EU. They had this program called the Erasmus Exchange. So I got to go spend a year in the Netherlands at the University of Leiden. I'm a big believer, when you're younger, if you've got the chance to travel and to explore the world, it's just a great thing to do. So I really, got to learn, both in the classroom and outside the classroom as well when I went to Leiden. And then after Dundee, I got the chance to come to the U.S. I had a job lined up in Scotland for a great law firm there, was excited about that. But I had the chance to come over here for 1 year to study for my master's degree. And knowing that I was going back to Scotland, I had a job lined up, I was like, well, I'm going to take classes that are just going to broaden my intellectual horizons. And so, I later became a corporate attorney in the U.S., but, taking courses such as contemporary Islamic legal thought, reproductive rights in the Supreme Court, just amazing things, right? I didn't use them in private practice when I was in New York, but just, interesting things to read about and to learn. And then I stayed for a second year. I was kind of figuring out what was I going to do. At that point, I knew I didn't want to go back to Scotland. I wanted to be here in the U.S. That was one of my long-term goals. So I stuck around, spent a second year at the university I was at here, helping one of the professors She was writing a chapter for a book about domestic violence and female-female alliances in bonobos. So it was just this really interesting, legal research, looking at some anthropological work as well. It was incredible just to look into. And also stumbled into a job for a year. Job really I had absolutely no right, being in, but I worked for a negotiation training company, and so I got to travel the world. Talking to people about, how to negotiate. And I learned a lot more that year than I taught anyone else. Also had a wonderful boss back then, Shazad, and he taught me something I didn't really understand at the time, but as time has gone past, it's resonated with me a lot more, particularly I think in ethics and compliance. You can't teach adults, right? You can really only help adults learn. And so that's something that I think about a lot now. And really, when I approach ethics and compliance, I'm like, well, how do I help people learn rather than just trying to simply teach them what they need to know? And so after that, I sold out. I'm kidding, of course, but I went to New York. I worked for two big law firms. Great experience. Got to work in some big transactions. I probably started working as an attorney maybe a little bit too young. I was probably around 22, maybe 23 when I first started working at big law firms as an attorney. Probably would have been better for me, I think, if I maybe waited a little bit longer. I think there's some attorneys who can really practice and excel at such a young age. I probably needed a few more years to frankly grow up a little bit and mature and learn how to think a little bit more. But I as much as I appreciated the opportunities there, I also knew that, working at a big law firm wasn't for me, right? The hours, the nature of the work as well wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so at that time, there were a few other things going on in my life. One of them was my mom, actually, she passed away from pancreatic cancer. She passed at too young of an age. And it really got me thinking, look, life is short, right? We really should enjoy our limited time that we have. I actually get some great advice from, it was actually my mom's cousin, Bob, and he shared an expression, a ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are made for. And I really like that. I kind of really took that to heart, because I'm like, I can play it safe, right? I can stay in this job where, candidly, I don't want to sound disrespectful of my opportunities at the time with my colleagues, but I wasn't that happy with it, right? It wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I took a risk. Actually, I took some time off. I took a few months. I've been living in New York at that time for many years, about 7, maybe 8 years. I hadn't really enjoyed the city, right? I was just working all the time. So it was great to actually, be able to go and explore the city or do things or go and see different things. So it was really a lot of fun. But then after a period of time, I started to get a little bit restless, and Michelle, my wife, was like, you need to get back into doing something. And she's an attorney as well. So we decided we were going to leave New York City, and it was either we were going to go to Austin. She's from Texas originally, or we were going to move to Nashville. She went to Vanderbilt for college. I had a preference actually for Austin. I liked Austin more for some reason. And then this opportunity came up at Bridgestone. And I was really impressed. I really liked the people that I met with. I thought their whole approach was just really, it struck a chord with me. And I had only been to Nashville once before. I'd interviewed with Bridgestone. I'd been here for a weekend, and I bought my cowboy boots in my first visit here, and never bought cowboy boots again. But it was like, we're going to move there. We're going to do this. And I have to tell you, joining Bridgestone, it's been about 8.5 years now, and living in Nashville. Definitely just worked out so well. Incredibly happy to be here. So. That's a little bit about my journey so far.
Well, it's interesting as you're talking about different aspects of it. First of all, some of the experiences are similar to a lot of women in terms of the lack of work-life balance, and women often, think about think about that sooner than men. I want to overly stereotype it, and also the idea of all these different things. I think it's similar to me. I also started in a big law firm years ago, and I learned a lot. I saw great relationships there. But it wasn't something I wanted to do forever. But both the training and some of the other things and the breaks I took in between have really helped form me and what I do in ethics and compliance. And it sounds like, that's, a significant thing for you as well.
I think it definitely has. I think there's so many, we often think about learning as taking place in the classroom. And I like the Center for Creative Leadership, right? They talk about the 70-20-10 model where really 10% of your learning takes place in the classroom, but then, 20% is coaching. And then just that other 70% is just you learn through experiencing. And I think that's where, for me, sometimes, I'll learn things in the moment. There's other times where I feel like some of the most powerful lessons for me in my career, which I apply to ethics and compliance now, it probably doesn't speak too highly of me, but it's like years later, I'm like, oh, I finally get that point, right? Or it's when knowledge turns into really understanding, and I'm like, okay, now I see that, I can kind of value that lesson. So it's there's definitely been a lot of helpful things across the years.
Yeah. One of the other things that's always, in our conversations, and even especially now this month, because it's June and we're in the midst of Pride Month right now. And, we've talked a lot about both your commitment to diversity and for women and for others. And I've also noticed that I want to ask a couple questions about that. Well, first is, can you talk about how diversity impacts your work in compliance and now as you're moving more into the global risk management area?
Yeah, so I've been very lucky. I mean, I think from my background, I've had the chance to live in different places. And so moving into global risk management, previously I've been working as general counsel for Latin America, which is just an amazing experience to see, the world from a different lens, a different perspective. But also for compliance, I chair our global compliance working group. So, we talk about compliance from really a global perspective, what works, what needs to be the global standard, what needs to be, globally aligned, but with some flexibility. And then in terms of how it's implemented, and then what should we really leave to the particular regions. But I really do enjoy that, right? I think it's, wonderful to work with people from different parts of the world, to travel to places, a lot of places I haven't been, and I hope to visit in the future. But it's fun, it's eye-opening. You get to see how life is different for other people. But I also enjoy it because it allows me to, see the similarities, or to reflect on, frankly, my own biases or my experience and how I see the world. And I think that broadens it. But definitely when it comes to diversity, it is such a key topic, and it has been for a long time. It's getting a lot more attention now, but it's not as if it's just becoming important now, but it has been for such a long time, just hasn't been talked about or really, I think, given the focus it needs. But people are individuals, and I think as we like to use labels, right? We seem to have a need to sort people very quickly and use different labels. So you're from this country, you're a particular age, gender, sex, religion, political view, whatever it is at all. But people, they're not labels. And so simply because you're given a particular label doesn't mean that's who you are. And so for me, I'm from the UK originally. But I've always felt this affinity for the U.S., and I feel like I belong in the U.S., and I've been fortunate to come here and become a citizen. And so I think to me, diversity is about letting people define who they are. I often tell my kids, I probably give them more life advice than they want or need, especially coming from me. But I try to tell them be kind and be yourself. Like those are two of the easiest things to be, but sometimes they're the hardest things to really express.
Yeah.
And one of my neighbors last year, she shared this great quote. It really, struck a chord with me. It was from a filmmaker. Her name it's Lisa Valencia Svensson. I think I pronounced her name correctly. And the quote that she made, I think she made it like 10 years ago, and she used it again in a speech a couple of years ago. It's who is telling whose story to whom and why. And I like that because it's like, what's your story? How do we amplify, support the stories of different people to tell their stories? And so it's, we almost don't need to travel the world, right, to hear different stories. They're right here in our own communities, whether it's DC or Nashville or wherever you are. It's just amplifying and giving a platform for other people to share who they are. So I think it is such an important thing, and I do think as well in ethics and compliance, the more we can do to support diversity and think about it is going to be an important thing.
Well, I think that actually dovetails well into my next question for you, because as we're talking about telling stories and talking about that, one of the things you talk about a lot, and I think it's part of your story and what we should all have as part of our story, is ethics and compliance for humans. So what is that?
Yeah, I think at times people like ethics and compliance for humans, like as opposed to what? Like who else would it be for? But the reason I like talking about ethics and compliance for humans, I think most people in corporate America or wherever people are located, right?
They're human.
They're human. They are even lawyers at big law firms or former lawyers in big law firms. We are human as well. But I think most people understand, right? Ethics and compliance is an incredibly important area. But I think a lot of people can find that ethics and compliance, it can seem a little bit scary, maybe a little bit abstract. And so we know it's important, but what really is it, and what should we be doing? And so I'm certainly no game theory expert at all, but I've been kind of playing with the basics of game theory over the last couple of years. And there's an acronym that I think kind of sums it up well. It's PARTS, PARTS, and so it's players, added value, rules, tactics, and scope. I think if you only see ethics and compliance through a rules lens, then you're really missing out. And so the way that I like to explain it is continue with like game theory, right? Think about sports, right? All sports have rules, but sports are about so much more than just the rules, right? The rules are there to help the game be played competitively, safely, for the benefit of the different stakeholders. And the stakeholders, it's more than just the referees and the umpires, right? It's the fans, it's the players, it's other people as well. But I think the same is true with ethics and compliance, right? The rules are absolutely important, but they are not the purpose of ethics and compliance, right? They are how we help people be compliant, how we help them be ethical. To me, I think ethics and compliance, it's really about people, right? It's like, how do we help people who are often good intention, right? How do we help them do the right thing? And then how do we help other people not to be harmed by the behavior of others? And so I think, too often in ethics and compliance, I do think we only see, we look at the kind of the game, or to kind of borrow Simon Sinek's terminology, it's like business is an infinite game, and we only look at it through this rules-focused lens, and we're really missing out. And I think you see that as well, like the stories that are being told, right? You look at the headlines, company X, did this type of violation, they paid a fine. But who were the people that were harmed by that wrongdoing? When it comes to matters such as bribery, like people are harmed by bribery. It's not just the bad actors and the people that did wrong. And so I think it kind of ties back to that quote by Lisa Valencia Svensson. It's like, whose story are we telling? To whom and why are we telling it? And maybe the last point I'll mention on this, Lisa, I had the fortune a few years ago to hear Olga Pontes speak at it was one of the SECE's conferences. It was the one, it was in DC or just outside of DC. And she, for anyone that doesn't know, she is the Chief Compliance Officer. She might have a broader title, but she now works at Nova Nor, which was at the time Odebrecht. I'm pronouncing the company correctly. And she shared one slide that really stuck with me, which was the number of employees that they had. And in 2014, before this scandal, they had about 168,000 employees. Fast forward 4 years, and they've less than 50,000 people. And you just think about that is the impact on, all those people, their families. And there was a great article in the Guardian a few years ago where they interviewed one of their former employees. And you just saw the impact of him, losing his job, and that the branding, he was struggling to find work. He was not eating. He was depressed. He was worried about, how was he going to support his then 2-year-old kid? So it's really, it's about seeing and hearing, those stories, those human stories in ethics and compliance. You can't get anyone excited about the FCPA, but when you tell human stories, it just makes it less scary, less abstract. So it's kind of my long way of saying that's really what I think it's about. It's the purpose of ethics and compliance. It's to help people. So how do we build programs that support people?
Yeah, I think people, if they feel supported, are more likely to come ask you questions. And most people want to do the right thing. And there's always a bad actor or two, but if you make it harder for them to do it and easier to identify them, you're in a better place. I mean, nothing's perfect like that. But yes, for humans, I love that, the ethics and compliance, because a lot of times we forget that you can forget that there are people involved just trying to understand what we're talking about, because we live in it every day too. So that human connection is really important.
I think that's right. And you and I did, we're going to do another session on it as well, talking about policies for humans that humans won't hate, but it's even how do you write policies? Is it like who are the stakeholders of that policy? Are you making it employee centric so people can understand it's actually going to be workable? Or are you just reiterating the law and telling people, look, here's all the reasons we're going to fire you, but we're not actually trying to help you? So I think it is just kind of putting that human side of it and really making sure that people are the stakeholders of the program. It's not just one stakeholder that we're trying to satisfy.
Yeah. And, it's interesting too. I'm just going to pivot a little bit about that to talk about, that working that way can build communities, and we all try to do that. But also, I think when I've thought about your Sunday tips and the Sunday morning compliance tips, it's interesting because not only is it a column, similar to some of the stuff we've done here at podcast, you've built sort of a community. There are people who would just kind of will chime in the discussion, or will look at it on the weekends or mention it during the week. I don't know if that's something, I never anticipated exactly the community we've ended up with here. I'm thrilled about it every day. I think it's fabulous. And now I see how it could have happened. I was wondering if, you could talk about how you started doing this and sort of what you've seen grown and evolved.
I think, I definitely wouldn't compare where I am with my weekly tips to where you and Mary have taken Great Women in Compliance. Maybe longer term, I'll get there with that. But I feel like it was another thing. I mean, it's kind of like a pattern of my whole career where I've had luck and kind of stumbled into things. It wasn't really a long-term plan. I do believe if you want to learn something to teach. So it was. I forget how many years ago, I was like, well, let me see if I can do, I think it was like 6 weeks. I'm going to do like 6 weeks of posts. And I started doing that. And it started to get some engagement. And so it kind of became a habit. And then people started commenting on it, or there was one week I was on vacation, or I skipped it for whatever reason. I actually had some people mention to me like, oh, you didn't post on Sunday. I was like, these were people who've never liked or commented on it. I was like, well, people are actually seeing it. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Sometimes I get more engagement and people like the comments. Other times people don't. Either there's not the engagement or people might disagree. But I've enjoyed it. Probably, one, it's challenged me to kind of think about what content can I put out there. But also just the people that I've actually had the chance to connect with, through the tips, or it's always great, frankly, for my ego when someone's like, oh, I really like your comment. But I probably learn a lot, or probably learn the most when someone's like, I disagree, or I see your point, but I think about it differently. So I really do enjoy that engagement. Most people, I think, have been wonderfully kind. I think I've only had one person over the years that I had to block because their comments were not really what I was not particularly kind. But apart from that, it's been wonderful.
There's constructive comments and discussions, and then there are trolls.
That is a very good way of putting it, indeed. And so, all for healthy debate. But once you start getting some comments, you're like, oh, I'll take a step back. I'm okay.
Well, I remember when we started the podcast, I just thought about this. We've literally been doing it 2 months. We had no idea what we were doing. Somebody went on iTunes, didn't make any comments, but gave us 1 star. So I was like, how could you dislike this much to affirmatively go, what were you expecting? This is like episode counting number 4. What did we do to you? It's one of those things where you're kind of thinking, I just don't understand that you actually affirmatively went out of your way to do that. It took me a long time. When I finally saw it, I'm like, oh, we have 5 ratings. 4 5s and a 1. And then I was like, are there any reasons anything we could do to improve? No, just somebody didn't like it. I just remember laughing about that. But I think the other reason I wanted to ask you a little bit about that is because you started this and it really has, become a calling card in some ways. So I was thinking to talk back about how can people use opportunities like that? And similar to what we do in Great Women in Compliance, it's not like I started a podcast to figure out my next career opportunity or to network, but it's been a great consequence. How do you think people can identify projects that are good for them and be able to do that to build their career?
Yeah, I think it's figuring out, what do you enjoy doing, right? What do you have time to do as well? But then also not being, if it doesn't go well, right? You can always, unless you're investing so much money or time or you're changing your job, you can probably fix it. But I remember actually it was the first time I spoke at a conference for ethics and compliance. I'd helped, I was on the planning committee for that conference. A few weeks before was like, I don't belong on this panel. Like I look at the other panelists who were on there and was like, nah, I'm going to drag this down. And so I ended up saying, like, you're going to be better off without me being on it. And they actually pushed back and said, no, you're going to be on this. Like you should be. And I'm so glad that I did, because I just, I doubted myself. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this, if I'm going to be good at this. Do I have enough to share with other people? And so, since then, as you know, Lisa, I don't stop talking about ethics and compliance. Probably went from a lack of confidence to an excess of confidence and an ability to be quiet. But I think I was glad to kind of push through that resistance, and now I really enjoy it. So I think I would just encourage someone, like, find out what's going to work for you, and also don't feel like you've got to be the expert in the room, right? You don't have to be the smartest person, but what is your value? What knowledge or information or experiences do you have that you can share with other people? I think once you see that, other people will see that as well. And so I think that's, for me, I really enjoy doing my little tips, maybe writing some longer articles from time to time. I enjoy speaking as well. Those all work for me. And I think it's just finding what's going to give you joy, what's going to, make you feel like you're contributing to the community, and it's going to be valuable as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The other thing I think is to go back and think about what's genuine to you. Because if you're going in to do something like that, or for us for the podcast or for anything, it is because you enjoy it first. If you get the second, it comes out of it. People who go in, I've had people say over the years, wow, that's so great. Maybe doing a podcast will help me find a new job. It's like, it's a lot of work before that might happen. So, and it's not going to come off well if you're not doing it because of the excitement and the interest in the particular project. So I think what you're saying is absolutely right, because that's how you can grow it. And I do think it's interesting that you've touched on something we talk about a lot here, which is the imposter syndrome. So I think, and it's interesting to hear, how quickly, that you were able to get through it. But, I think we all suffer it. And sometimes when I have those career challenges or thoughts, when something is scary to me, I try to get excited about it. But then otherwise I start to think, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen in a podcast is a bunch of people don't like it. No one listens. That's okay. But I still had the experience. So
I think it is. I do think so many people struggle with the imposter syndrome, and it's real. But I think when you experience that, right, it's such an isolating feeling as well. And I think it's like knowing that so many other people, in fact, Lisa, if you're saying that you experience it from time to time, I'm like, it just is the more that we can kind of normalize that. And I think, being genuine about it, I do with one of my kids, she did a presentation at school and she told me she was nervous. It was like, we'll reframe it. What if you tell yourself that you are excited instead of nervous? That did backfire though when we were skiing earlier this year, and she's a much better skier than I am. And I told her I was nervous, and with all sincerity, she was like, well, what if you just tell yourself you're excited? Don't you put my advice back to me. It only goes one way. So maybe that's the other thing I'd say is be careful with the advice you give. It can come back to haunt you later in life.
Yes. Well, my father often says we raise enemies occasionally. Yes. When I throw his advice back at him, like, have you thought about blah, blah, whatever? He's, something he said to me my entire time growing up, and we raise enemies. But I think that's it's like skiing. I totally can see that. One of my friend's kids who I started skiing with when he was young, and I was really good then, now associates me. He's 14 years old, can blow me away. I was like, let's go here now, Lisa. No, that could be my life. And then he's like, you could do this. I know you can. I'm thinking, when did this happen? But with that, it's interesting that you were just talking about your daughter, because you are a very proud parent and a very proud, as they call them now, #girl dad. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to your daughters that might be different than to boys? And, what if you think they're going into either ethics and compliance or for any career they want to do? What would be the thing you think could have avoided years of either imposter syndrome or heartbreak or your worries or anxiousness? Yeah,
no, I think it's a great question. Yes, so I get 3 girls and 1 boy. And it honestly, it pains me, it annoys me that there's still so much unequal treatment for girls and women even today. It's 2022, and yet that's still the reality we face. But also recognize that, my son is going to experience tailwinds that my daughters are going to experience as headwinds for no other reason than they were born female. And so, I see that. And one of the things I try to do with my kids, you know this, Lisa, other people may not, that I am a complete dork. And this is going to sound incredibly dorky what I do, but I do this every day. It's before they get out the car, I kind of ask my kids like a series of questions. And like one of them, like, what is success? And they will tell me every single day is 10% talent, 90% effort. I'm like, what does that mean? It means, keep trying, keep working, keep learning. And really what I want to do for them is to continuously, support them to kind of self-affirm and internalize, who they are, right? They need to be able to see their value as individuals. They need to be able to see themselves as kind of growth, as having like a growth mindset, being able to learn, being able to grow, being able to adapt, to be resilient. And so I use that, for them not to feel like they need to be restricted by labels that other people are going to put on them, but who are they? How do they find their voice? How do they find their personality, their value? And so that's something I really try and do with them, is just kind of build them up. I want them to internalize it and know that they are going to face challenges in life. And, you've got to be able to lean into that. If you come across, headwinds, how do you somehow leverage that to make it a tailwind, right? That's what you got to be able to do. And so I think I'd probably give them like similar advice for ethics and compliance. I do think in ethics and compliance, success, at times it can be 10% talent, 90% effort. It can be a lot of work at times trying to get people on board, or you're trying to push an initiative, or, so many of us, we operate with small teams. The effort that you have to put into to building and running a successful compliance program, it just takes so much effort, right? You've got to have talents, you've got to have knowledge, you've got to have experience. But I think, recognizing that, inherent talent or knowledge, that's not enough, right? That's, how do you make sure that you're communicating with people, that you're actually engaging people? That takes a lot of time and effort to really do. And they're going to face a lot of rejection, right? We all face rejection in ethics and compliance. People will push back. We deal with emotionally difficult conversations when we conduct internal investigations or just other matters that you have to deal with. So, kind of keep going, keep learning, and not giving up is probably the advice I'd give them.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's interesting as you talk about that. Some of the most emotional things for me is, even if somebody does something wrong and we are terminating their job for whatever reason, you always think, like you were talking about some of the people at Odebrecht earlier, it impacts so many people. It impacts families, friends, others. And really our impact is so real. So I guess one more thing before we close, for those of you who don't know, Adam is also a very accomplished baker. So I always like to ask him what he has most recently made in my continuing attempt to go to an event. Although it may not work out so well with his schedule this time, but so what you do the birthday cakes too. So I just want to know what the most recent project was.
The most recent project, I think it actually wasn't anything as good as the cakes. I did make tortillas from scratch recently, surprisingly easy, and none of the kids ate them. So, but that's kind of a norm. That if there's sugar and icing, then the kids will eat it. So. I don't think I need to make some more croissants. I know that's on the list, and I probably need to do some cakes at some point. So
you do the chocolate croissants, right?
I do chocolate croissants. Yeah, they're good. Croissants are not as hard as people think. They take time. But I'm actually not a very good baker. But it's just I feel like if you give me a recipe to follow, and it's not too complicated, and it doesn't have like 40 or more ingredients, I'll probably follow it and do okay with it. So
yeah, I look for like 9 ingredients for the foods that I cook, but it's a different topic. But I will say that and one more sign of diversity. I think this is the first time we've ever discussed cooking or baking on the Great Women in Compliance podcast. So I appreciate that you have been here with us as our Scottish baker, but also in all of the great work that you are doing for ethics and compliance. I'm so fortunate that you're part of this community. I am looking forward to us speaking. We'll be speaking together about policies for humans. I didn't get the title quite right, but basically I'm all about policies for humans right now. And thank you, Adam, on behalf of Mary and me, the Compliance Podcast Network. So thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.